Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well today. If you're in the UK, we've looks like we're finally getting a little bit of sunshine, which is very nice and almost surprising because it's been raining so much recently. Fingers crossed it stays for a little bit longer and I actually get out to take my dogs for a proper walk today rather than walking through the rain, which neither them nor I are a fan of. My dogs are a little bit precious. They don't like rain and water too much. And I'm not a big fan either. So it goes for all of us. so, um, so let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And it's something, I always try to make an effort with giving feedback to candidates. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you try to give constructive feedback to candidates and either you can't get hold of them or they don't want that feedback, and ultimately that's up to that individual. But it's really important to me that as recruiters we at least make an effort to try and give good quality, constructive, useful feedback to candidates after a recruitment process, and really, for me, I think we should be giving it at every stage of the process. That's not always possible, depending on the volumes that you're dealing with, and the number of vacancies that you're dealing with, and the volume of candidates. So, for example, if you're dealing with very high volume recruitment, and you have in the region of up to 100 or 100 plus applications, then clearly you're not going to be able to give constructive feedback to every single candidate at the application stage. But you should be doing that at the interview stages, because at that point they've invested some of their time, as much as you have, to actually come along, whether that's virtually or face to face, and meet with you and spend the time. And it's not just the time of an interview. They would probably have prepared. They will have, well, first of all, they'll have prepared their application. They should have prepared for the interview. They should have done some research and all of those things. So it's not just the 1 hour for the interview that they've given their time. They've also prepared and perhaps spent another hour or two, and then if there's traveling as well on top of that. So it can be a significant amount of time that somebody's invested. So the investment from the recruiter or from the hiring manager back to them in giving them some constructive feedback, for me, is only fair. It's only the right return on the investment that they've given up front. But I think the reason for today's session, and I'll come to this in the slides, is to show you that yes, it's the kind human thing to do, but it's not just that. It's actually really commercially important too. And if you're working on building talent pipelines and developing a portfolio of candidates for the future, this is critical. This isn't just a nice to have. It's not just best practice. It's really important. So let me share my slides and we'll get going. So, as I said, the topic today is about the secret of being a great recruiter, and what makes the difference between a good recruiter and a great recruiter. And I genuinely do think this is one of the big ticket items that makes a difference. Obviously, there are other things that make a difference between it being a good recruiter and a great recruiter, but this is a really important one. So what are we going to cover today? So first of all, I want to cover off what the goals of this webinar are. There's a few key goals that I want to get across. Why this is the difference. So, why giving constructive feedback makes a difference to you being a good recruiter and to the experience of the candidate. And I'll come into that. The benefits of mastering this skill, and what it will do for you both as an individual, but also for your candidate and also for the organization, I think is really important as well. The top tips and an overview of those, and I'll break into the tips in a bit more detail. So there's 5 tips I'm going to share with you, and then we'll come to any questions that you've got. I will dip in and out of the chat window as well to see if there are any questions as we go through. So if you do have any questions as we're going along, I'll stop every now and then and see if there's questions in the chat box, and I'll answer those for you. So what are the goals of this webinar today? So first of all, it's for me to communicate to you the commercial benefits of providing that kind, constructive feedback. Because ultimately, when we're in business, it's important to be kind, and we all want to be human and do the right thing by people. However, we have to couple that with being commercial and being aware of the demands on the business, the demands of our time from the business. And, so if we can bring the two things together, so make it kind and human, but also commercially savvy, then, it's a win-win-win for absolutely everyone. For the organization, it's a win. For you, it's a win. And for the candidate, it's a win as well. And that's the ideal scenario. And so obviously I'm going to share tips for making this, what is a very challenging task, easier and more satisfying ultimately. And, what I will say, right up front is this is probably always going to be a challenging task. I've been in recruitment almost 30 years, and I still find it hard. I still hate giving people feedback to tell them that they've been unsuccessful in a process. It's one of the jobs that I hate doing. I've never liked it, and I don't think anybody does. And I'd almost go as far as to say that if you don't care about giving feedback, negative feedback to candidates, you probably don't care about the candidates in the first place. And so I find it hard. So, if you're, you probably will always find it a little bit hard. And, I guess it's just getting past that, but it's easier to get past that if you've got a purpose and you know what you're trying to achieve and you know the outcome that you're trying to get to. And so for me, I know it's hard, but it's so important, and I know what difference it makes to the candidates that I deal with. And so I put up with the tough, the fact that it's a little bit difficult for me, and I just get on with it because I know the outcome is worth it in the end. And so some of the tips I want to do are to help turn that difficult task into an opportunity to positively impact your candidate's future, and also positively can't speak today, positively impact the business and the reputation of the business. And so, one of the key reasons that it's important to do this is that it builds trust. It builds trust with candidates, and it helps the candidate trust the organization. And again, we'll come to this in a moment, but if you're trying to nurture a relationship with a candidate, one of the key things to doing that is to building trust with them. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou. And if you've been on my sessions before, I have actually used this in a session before, but I thought it was really appropriate for this particular topic. And that quote is, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that is so true. So many times I've given feedback to candidates, and perhaps I've spoken to them at another point later on. They won't always remember exactly what I said to them, but they remember that I was kind and I gave them feedback, and they appreciated my honesty and my directness in most occasions. And so I think that's really important to remember when we're thinking about giving feedback to candidates. And when I talk about feedback, I'm focusing here on negative feedback. Obviously, it's easy to give positive feedback, so we're focusing on giving feedback with somebody who's been unsuccessful. So what are the benefits to mastering this skill? So the first benefit is to really help you develop and improve that employer brand. It makes a really big difference to your employer brand if you're out there doing and living the business values. So you're demonstrating those business values. You're showing prospective candidates that you live and breathe the values of your business. It also helps you to create and nurture a pipeline of future talent, because this, the candidate that you're giving feedback to might not be perfect for the role right now. It might be that, I don't know, they were a year or two away from being perfect for the role, or it may be that they were just effectively pipped to the post by a slightly better candidate on this occasion, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to be the perfect candidate on another occasion. So and this helps you to nurture that future talent and keep them in your pipeline, so that you can reach out to them, or they will probably come back to you again in the future. So nurturing relationships with those prospective candidates. Oh, come on, slides. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about what I call the high converting candidate journey. I'm not going to focus on all of this pathway today, but I want to just focus on some parts of it. So down here, when you've got the shortlisting, interview, and offer stage, these are the stages, of course, where either either the organization rejects a candidate or the candidate rejects the organization. But we're going to focus on today if the organization rejects the candidate. So they can be rejected here at the the shortlisting stage, or here at the interview stage, or they might just not be made an offer, but effectively, I guess that's after the final interview stage. This is obviously rejected is where you're going to give them this constructive feedback. Now, what I would say to do before you identify, before you go to give them the feedback, identify first if they are one of your ideal candidate profiles. So if they fit the ideal candidate profile that you want to nurture and engage with for the long term. So, in some ways, this ICP box should be before rejected. And in fact, I might move that around for future events. If they are an ICP, if they are an ideal candidate profile, then you will make sure you give them some really good constructive feedback so that you can keep that relationship alive, help them identify the things they need to do to be a candidate that you will hire in the future, and then bring them into your talent pool, nurture them and keep in touch and build that relationship for the future. So segment them into the relevant market or the relevant talent pool. If you've got multiple talent pools, draw them into your talent pool on your CRM, set up that automated nurture information and sequence that I've talked about in previous sessions. You're building that continuous creative communication and those human touch points where they're appropriate. And then when you have an opportunity that you think is going to be right for them further down the track, then you're reaching out to them, you're targeting them actively, and you're drawing them back in, or you're hoping that you've kept that relationship alive so that if they see a vacancy that now suits them and they've now got the experience or the skills that you talked about when you rejected them that first time round, that they come back around and apply for your vacancy and come back into your ATS along this pathway, and hopefully this time will be shortlisted, interviewed, and perhaps offered. And so I just again want to touch on the sequence here of candidate engagement and nurturing, because this is really critical. It's one of the big reasons why it's so important to provide really good quality feedback and nurture that candidate for the future. So you develop your ideal candidate profile, you're building that talent pool, you're bringing the candidate into your talent pool, you're then engaging with them on an ongoing basis, and you're nurturing them and building a relationship and that continuous engagement for the future. So that what you're doing there is you're building what we call the know, like, and trust factor. If you haven't been on my sessions before, what that means is you're giving the candidate or getting the candidate an opportunity to get to know you as an individual recruiter, and also you as an organization get to like you as an individual and as an organization, and get to trust you as an individual and as an organization. And that's how you really develop those relationships, so that you come full circle and that person comes back into your application process in the future. And so, obviously all of this, the purpose of being kind is that it's not just a human thing to do, which of course it is, but it's also best practice, and it's also commercially critical to you building a talent pipeline for the future. And so getting into the tips, I might just quickly check the chat. Bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to remove the no comments at the moment. Feel free to pop any comments or any questions into the chat box, and I will pop back and pick those up again. And obviously we've got some time for questions at the end. So let's get back to the slides. So, the tips, my top tips are, first of all, be prepared. So, we'll get into this in a little bit more detail. Choose the right time and the right place. Be honest and be concise. Show empathy and understanding. And you'll see here that I don't talk about sympathy, because for me, empathy and sympathy are very different things. you don't necessarily want to sympathize with them, but you want to empathize with them, and you want to show them that you actually care and you understand their situation. And then offer them support, guidance, and signposting where possible. So let's get into the tips in a little bit more detail. So being prepared, what does that mean? So, having a think about the candidate in the first place, gathering any feedback that you need to get. So it may be that you've got feedback from your interview. It may be that you need to get feedback from a hiring manager or from a hiring panel. You gather all of the feedback that you need, read the feedback and understand what that is and be prepared to repeat it back and think about the things that you want to get across. And that will help you to anticipate any questions or any concerns that candidate is likely to have and what they're going to want to know from you. So, so by gathering that information and those resources, you'll have it all ready for you and ready to go and be ready with what it is you want to tell them. You want to be concise, which we're going to come to. So I tend to really focus on maybe, a couple of pieces of key information or key feedback that I think is going to help them moving forward, to give them something constructive and useful to take away. Choosing the right time and place is really important. This is something that can't be done when you're running around or running from one meeting to another on a mobile phone. You need to give yourself time, and I tend to batch them. So if I've got interviews, I tend to call all of the candidates in one go, because it means I allocate myself a quiet time and space to be able to do it, so that I've got a private location, I don't have distractions around me, and I can give them the time to answer any questions they might have. Some candidates won't ask any questions at all. They'll just take your feedback on board, and sometimes they'll want to go away and digest that and think about it before they ask questions. Others will immediately have questions, so you need to allow yourself the time to give them to be able to answer those questions. Being honest and concise. So it's really important to be clear and honest about the reasons for rejection. So many times I hear candidates say to me, and I heard this a huge amount when I was in agency. I'd ask them how they'd been for another interview. I'd ask them how they got on at that interview, because I wanted to know the feedback so that I could help them prepare for their next interview or for the interview that I was putting them forward for. And they'd come to me and say, oh, well, I was told I was really good, but there was another candidate that was just better on the day, and so I was pipped to the post. Now, obviously, on some occasions that is true, but I heard this all the time. It was pretty much the standard piece of feedback that was given to candidates. So, and I think it's highly unlikely that that's always the case, that is the feedback every time, but it's a very easy piece of feedback. And for me, it's quite lazy. I think it's quite lazy feedback, unless, of course, it's true. But it's quite lazy feedback to give candidates, because it gives you an easy out without having to have a difficult conversation. But what it does is, or what it doesn't do, is it doesn't give that candidate anything useful. It doesn't give them anything constructive that they can go away, they can digest, they can learn from, and they can implement or find a way to solve whatever that is and help them find the right role next time. It might be that they're going for an opportunity that is, their skills are just not quite there for, and actually there's some really practical things they can do to develop those skills. And if nobody tells them what those things are, they don't know. And so they go around, applying for jobs and always being pipped to the post and wondering why. So let's be the ones who can actually tell them what they can do to make a difference to the next time they apply for the role. So, like I say, being really clear and being really honest about those reasons for rejection. Obviously, you want to do that in a diplomatic way. I don't absolutely not believe in crushing somebody's spirit. We can do this in a constructive, positive way. And I usually start off by saying, I'd like to give you some constructive feedback that I feel, you can use moving forward. Is that something you'd be interested in hearing? Because, as I said at the beginning, some candidates don't want that, and it's not our job to force it upon them. But let's give them the choice of giving them some constructive feedback and some information that they can work on and they can develop for the future. And I always think it's hard to do it, and I've absolutely fallen into the trap of trying to sugarcoat things and over explaining. And it's very easy to do this because you feel bad for them. You don't like doing this, and it's not a nice task. But if at all possible, do try to avoid sugarcoating it. Like I say, be diplomatic, but be honest. and try not to over explain, because sometimes you lose the message if you explain too much. Next tips are to show empathy and understanding. So try putting yourself into the candidate's shoes. If it was you at the other side of that table, what would you want to know? What would you want that recruiter or that hiring manager to give you as feedback? Would you want them to be honest? What would you want to walk away with something constructive that you can do something with in the future? I would personally, but that might not be the same for you. But really think about it from a candidate perspective, and think, right, what would I want from this person? Do I want them to pay me lip service and just tell me that I was pipped to the post, or do I want something really constructive that I can work on? And do acknowledge their feelings. It's important to let them know that you do understand that they're going to be disappointed, and that you do understand that they really wanted this role, and that you don't want to disappoint them and let them down. But circumstances are what they are. Because I just think it's nice to let them know that you do understand their feelings, and you're not you're not doing this with a lightly. It's a difficult conversation to have. And if you can, offer support and guidance and signposting. So providing feedback for improvement is the key to all of this, which is why if you prepare before you go in, you can usually have some things, perhaps 2 or 3 points that you can give them to go off and develop or improve on. It might be that they need to work on their interview style, their interview techniques, so you can give them some signposting and some points as to where they can go and develop that. Or it might be that they need to develop some skills or some experience. And again, you can give them that feedback. And, it might be that they're a couple of years away from securing this role because of their experience. And if they know that, they can go away and develop that and then come back again in the future. And if there's any signposting you can do to resources or tools that might help them, do pass those on to them if those are relevant. And so just in summary again, it's, doing this is kind. It's also best practice for the organization, but it is also commercially critical to building and sustaining that candidate pipeline for the future. It's almost never going to become an easy task for you. And so I don't want to sugarcoat this either. I don't want anyone to leave thinking, oh, it's now going to be easy, because it's probably not going to be easy. It's always going to be difficult. But for me, the difference is when a candidate says, thank you for being honest to me, it makes it all worthwhile. And when you start to get that kind of feedback from candidates, it'll make you realize how important it actually is. I've had so many candidates say to me, thank you for your honesty. Nobody's ever told me that. Thank you for giving me that constructive feedback. I really appreciate it, and I'm going to go and do these things. I actually had a candidate, and it was it was a conversation that inspired this session. Actually, it was just before I put this session online. I'd spoken to a candidate who had traveled quite a significant, had a telephone interview screening, telephone interview, and then had traveled a significant distance, which included flying to a location for an interview. That candidate, and with a large, reputable organization. So this isn't with a small business. This is with a large, reputable organization, which should have been doing things, doing things in best practice. Flew to the interview, had a what seemed like quite a positive interview, but of course you don't always know what the feedback's going to be until you walk away. And if you put yourself in your candidate's shoes, sometimes it's hard to tell how the interview's gone. You think you've done your best, and perhaps you have, but you don't know who the other candidates are. You also don't know entirely what they're looking for exactly on the day. That candidate flew back home and didn't get any feedback for I think over a week, at which point she chased up the recruiter or the hiring manager, I'm not entirely sure which one it was, to be told that she hadn't been successful and that they'd offered to another candidate. And, she was pipped to the post, and sorry about that. Can you imagine how devastating that was for that candidate to have invested that amount of time, energy, and financially investment? So the cost of flying, the cost of all that travel, because it's not just flying, it's also taxis from the airport to the location, the time invested in preparing for that interview, because this was a senior position, this wasn't a junior role. it would have been days of time, at least 2 days, plus the cost along with it, because there was no reimbursement for interview costs, which not all organizations can do, and that's fine. She was okay with that, but you would appreciate some feedback. To then not be given any feedback and to have to chase, and then finally being told, oh yes, sorry about that, but you were pipped to the post. So there's nothing constructive, nothing useful. And she wasn't really given any feedback at all and was devastated. And when I called her to give her feedback, which wasn't positive, in fact, she was a very close second on this particular occasion. She was a really strong candidate, one that I want to keep in touch with for the future, because I do think if we had a similar role again, I would absolutely go back to this candidate and ask her to reapply. But even if it wasn't for that, it's kind when she had invested her time to come along for an interview with us. But she told me this story and said, I really appreciate you spending the time giving me feedback. This is what happened on my last experience of going for an interview. So I really appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day to give me a call. For me, it was no more than a 10-minute conversation. It was so little of my time to invest, and it made such a massive difference to that candidate, and they really appreciated it. And I hear that all the time. And so I think when you start to do this and start to give people something constructive to work on, you will start hearing them saying, thank you for being honest. It's not something I've been told before, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to do something with it. It makes it all worthwhile. So I'm just going to come to see if there's any comments in here. Hi, Ellen. How are you doing? Alan's comment, I think it's important as a recruiter that we push for constructive feedback too. Absolutely. And, I think that's so true. Sorry, let me finish reading your comment. In my experience, a lot of hiring managers, I knew exactly where you were going with this, Alan, to get constructive feedback from hiring managers. My experience, a lot of hiring managers just give a no due to time. This comes from having the right panel too, and not just a bum on the seat. 100%. And, I do think it's part of our role to really educate hiring managers on the importance of this. Because for a hiring manager, if they're not seeing the long-term benefits, and, and please, if you want the slides for this presentation, I'm really good, Ellen, thank you. If you want the slides for this presentation, please feel free to share these with hiring managers, or share the content with hiring managers and give them some tips. Because what often happens is hiring managers, they're working in the here and now. They're thinking of this particular recruitment process, and they're not thinking of the fact that this candidate might be suitable another time in the future, whether that's in a short term or whether that's in the long term, because there's someone that just needs extra skills and experience and could be a brilliant candidate for the organization in a couple of years. They don't always think like that. And it's our job as recruiters to help them understand the importance of this feedback and what it will actually do for our talent pipelines in the future, and what it potentially could do to bringing that candidate back around again when we're recruiting further down the track, or the next time we recruit for that role. Because obviously candidates they come into a new position, they're not going to stay in that role forever, or most of the time they don't come in forever. They're going to, we hope, be promoted through the organization and move on. And so that vacancy comes back around again. And that candidate, if they were very close, you want them to apply again for that vacancy. And perhaps if it's a year or two down the track, they could have amazing skills now and be absolutely brilliant for this role. So, we need to educate and support our hiring managers in understanding the importance of this kind of feedback, so that we can then, as a recruiter, make sure that we're able to give constructive feedback to our candidates. So any questions at all? I know it's probably not really a topic where there's a lot of questions. It's probably more of a giving insight as to why it's important to do it. Pamela, would love if you could share the slides, please. Yes, absolutely, no problem at all. Definitely would be helpful to share with hiring managers. No problem at all. And Pamela, I'll also be sending the recording. I will send the recording out because not everybody can attend live. So feel free to pass that on if you think it will be useful for them to watch the recording. This is not too long a session today, so they only need a half an hour of their time to invest. And I do think that education will make a big difference to them. So just really quickly before I wrap up and let you go for the day. So there's a few resources that I can share with you. Obviously, today's recording, I will send the link out to that, so you can either rewatch it or you can share it with colleagues and hiring managers as you feel appropriate. If you would like the slides as well, drop me a message in the comments, and I'll send the slides across with that. And also, I have a weekly, sorry, it's not weekly anymore, it's fortnightly blog on LinkedIn. Amazing, thank you, great timing, is at 7 p.m. in Australia. Oh, Pamela, you're in Australia. I used to live in Australia. I lived there for 10 years. I used to live in Melbourne. What part are you in? So yeah, I have a LinkedIn blog that is fortnightly. I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers, which is amazing because I've only had it for a few months, and I'm really chuffed that many people want to read the things I'm talking about. But if you're not subscribed, then so do subscribe to that. I'll pop a link into the chat when this is finished, and you can jump on there and subscribe and possibly be my 1,000 subscriber. Are you in Brisbane? Brilliant. I've spent not a huge amount of time in Brisbane, but I've been on holiday there a number of times because we lived there for 10 years. So we spent a lot of time around the Gold Coast when our kids were small, and going to all the theme parks up there. Beautiful part. Well, hello to Australia. And the last resource that's available to you as well is on my LinkedIn profile page. You'll see a link to a tool, a scorecard tool for measuring your candidate journey and your candidate experience. So basically, there's a series of questions that will help you to benchmark your current candidate journey and your current candidate experience, and give you, some tools and some ideas as to how you can improve that candidate journey for the future. So if you head over to my LinkedIn profile, there's a link in there. Again, I'll pop it into the chat for convenience as well. But it's there if you want to do it now. I think there's about 20 questions. It doesn't take very long because it's all just choosing from a range of questions, try to make it as easy as possible. But it's quite helpful as a benchmark. And what I recommend people do is to do it now and then come back to it after you've made some changes and do it again and see if your benchmark has changed, and use it as a tool to help you improve that candidate journey for the future. And I think that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So just checking if there's any final comments or questions. No. Well, thank you very much to those of you that have joined me live. It's always nice to have a few people live because it makes it a little bit more interactive. And I haven't put up the topic for next month as yet. Actually, so if you have any suggestions or anything that you'd like me to cover, pop it into the chat, and I'll happily have a look at that and see if it's something that I feel I've got the knowledge and experience to cover as a topic. It's always good to get suggestions from people who watch my lives. Oh, no worries, Alan. Yeah, it's one of those topics, isn't it? And like I said, as I was going through, it was when I was giving that feedback to a candidate about 6 weeks ago that it reminded me of the importance of it. And so I think it is one of those topics that you need to remind yourself about every now and then. And it reminded me how important it actually is, and that's why I thought it would be a good session to share. Yeah, good shout, Alan. Actually, unconscious bias is a really good one. I might actually go with that suggestion. Thank you. No problem at all, Pamela. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll send those links out to you and put some links into the chat box as well. All right. Thank you for joining me. Anybody that's watching on recording, I hope you get value out of this, and do let me know if you want to get any extra resources. Oh, hi, Sandra. Thank you. Market trends, yeah, that's a really good one. The difficulty with something like market trends is that it's so different in different locations, but I'll have a think about how I could incorporate that into a session. Reasonable adjustments for the entire recruitment process, yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely something I could do as well, because people really get confused about how they should make reasonable adjustments. So I can absolutely do a session on that at some point. Thank you very much. That's been brilliant. Some really good ideas there. Sometimes it's hard to come up with ideas of what people want to hear about. So thank you so much for your suggestions. Great. I'm going to leave you all there. Have a fantastic day. Hopefully it's sunny wherever you are, and I'll hopefully see some of you next month. Thanks, everyone.